Today we're talking about a little film called Replicas. I wanted to talk about this film not only because it was amazingly bad, but also because it made a lot of claims that begged debunking. One of my main critiques of this film is that it kind of moves along with the efficiency of a bullet list. So in my summary of this film, I'm just going to reiterate it to you as a bullet list. So Keanu Reeves works at a government facility where they are testing new technology to essentially suck out a person's consciousness, literally through like a metal straw, and transplant it into a robot with a synthetic brain. We see a lot of holograms. It does not go well.
Sergeant Kelly! Sergeant Kelly!
So then we get whisked along to the next scene. We are plunged into Keanu Reeves and his sun-soaked, loving family, and we see how great of a dad Keanu is. Mom really doesn't like the industry that he's in, even though she's a nurse apparently, and she should sort of appreciate the medical scientific side of this.
You can't just keep bringing people back from the dead until you have this stuff worked out.
How many times have you had a patient flatline in the ER?
She tells him that he has a wife and kids that adore him, and they just have a scientist.
You have kids that love you and a wife that adores you. And we have scientists.
Which to me means that she doesn't really adore him because he's too much of a scientist or something. Anyways, kind of out of the blue, they all just load into a van to go on a boat trip over the weekend. And it rains so hard that they can't see where they're going.
Can you see anything? I feel like we should pull over.
And then a tree branch falls on their car.
That was close.
Instantly impales the wife, and Keanu Reeves apparently is such a bad driver that instead of like hitting the brake or something, that van just launches off the side of the road and into a lake. Then the whole back half of the van goes in the water, so all of the kids drown. So Keanu Reeves killed off his whole family. This is within 15 minutes of the entire film. We haven't had a chance to like make connections with the family yet before they're just instantly ripped away from us. Normally, I would applaud a film that moved that efficiently, but in this case, I feel like something was missing. So after that happens, he drags the family out. He has kind of an awkward grieving scene for, half a minute.
Oh, sorry. Baby girl.
And then, predictably, he decides, well, I need to turn my dead family into clones and transplant their consciousnesses into those clones, as any grieving father would do. So he calls up his assistant, and somehow the assistant has all of the equipment with him necessary to boot the mapping sequence. I'm not really sure what that means.
Boot the mapping sequence, Ed.
Then they go back to Keanu Reeves' house with all of the material they need to clone his family.
Amino acids, fructose, accelerants.
Fructose?
You know, just a ton of primordial ooze.
Sadly, there are only 3 cloning devices, not 4, so Keanu Reeves has to sacrifice one of his children, even though later in the film we see another cloning device, so I'm not really sure what that's about. So then it's just a matter of he's not showing up to work, people are asking where he is, and it's just kind of like this waiting game while they're waiting for the clones to propagate, which apparently only takes 17 days, which really makes me wonder why they couldn't just reuse one of the cloning devices after one of them is finished. The family members are successfully cloned.
He's perfect, man.
He gets rid of all evidence, supposedly, of their 3rd child, who is now missing. And then, basically, everything's hunky-dory. The clones are kind of like, oh, I feel weird, what's going on? I don't remember some things. He just straight up tells his wife, and she's like, wow, that's crazy, but I have to trust you anyways. He's having dinner with his family, then his boss comes, and his boss is like, yo, you're not working for a medical lab, you're working for a military weapon thing, because we can implant the best pilot's brains into other pilots.
Imagine the best pilot put into 1,000 individual drones. The mind of a hacker loaded into
the virus.
They have to run away from these government operatives, but then they finally catch up to them, and bad guy brings them back to the army base, and he's forced to rebuild the algorithm because he destroyed it earlier. So Keanu Reeves rebuilds it because they're going to kill his family otherwise. Oh, and by the way, they kill his assistant. So he rebuilds the algorithm, but in doing so, he also loaded his consciousness into another robot. So we have human Keanu Reeves, and we have robot Keanu Reeves. And robot Keanu Reeves is, for some reason, super strong and really good at fighting. And then Keanu Reeves is like, hey, I'm gonna give the bad boss guy a second chance so he can work for me, giving second life to people who want it.
Boot the mapping sequence.
And the assistant stays dead because fuck him. I'm not an idiot. I know that most sci-fi is made by idiots for idiots, of which I am one. But Keanu Reeves in this film, I just kind of assumed that this was a role that he took because he needed the paycheck or whatever. This film was actually his, and this is his own words, this film is his baby.
It was my baby. It is my baby. I'm an executive producer on the picture. I was part of the beginning of the story and telling of this story and then the creation of it.
Let me be clear. I hate to throw shade at someone as undeserving of shade as Keanu Reeves, but this film genuinely deserves to be ripped apart to shreds. According to the makers of this film, Replicas asks a lot of questions.
Moral questions, some ethical questions.
Pretty soon we're going to get to a place where we're going to have options to do things, and we haven't really thought about what the consequences of those things are.
It's a conversation that the film is having with today, looking at the past and looking at the future.
It also does ask questions that are maybe a little bolder or braver or outside the box.
To me, this is, what's the word? Completely bogus.
With all of this darkness, this tragedy, there was the relationship of the family, you know, with the wife and the children and, you know, and all of us together.
The family is just that. They're just a family. There's really no reason for me to root for them other than sort of the established, like, well, you're supposed to care about them because they're a family and because they're Keanu Reeves' family and you're just supposed to care about them. The thing that's going to make me care about any characters is the stakes for those characters, what those characters are pursuing. And in this film, none of the family members are really pursuing anything before they die. There's just a lot of missed opportunity to integrate their stories with Keanu Reeves. Even if we didn't necessarily see, like, little Billy has a football game that he really cares about. Oh no, he died. But if we got to see little Billy, like, challenge his dad, like, hey, I never get to hear you tell me what you do for a living. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, like, is Keanu Reeves gonna tell him or not? Is he gonna have to wait until after he's a clone? Like, what's gonna happen? That would make me invested in the family, not just seeing that Keanu Reeves has a family. Like, we all have families, we all get it, we all like family, that's fine. That's not specific or particular to any movie. And really, like, the film itself has a moment where I actually start to care a little bit about the family. When they do wake up as clones, now there's stakes. When are they gonna figure out that they're clones? And that middle section of the film is honestly the only, like, slightly interesting part, and they immediately, like, leave that behind. You're building up this whole question throughout the film of, like, hey, what is the family gonna think of being clones? And you know what happens? The family literally just, like, gets over it. The wife forgives him, and the kids are just left asking what's going on for the rest of the film. They're never told what's going on, so...
Hey, Dad, who is Zoe?
Are you guys getting a divorce?
Maybe.
No.
What is going on? There are some bad people trying to hurt us. Just hold on and everything will be all right. What are you guys talking about? Drive to the clinic. Sophie, I need you to lie down. What do you mean? Dad, why?
It's okay. Here, get on the table. It's all right.
What? What are you saying?
It's okay, Sophie. It's okay.
Mom, what's going on? I'm serious. I know you're afraid,
but you're just gonna have to try and relax and trust me, okay? It's gonna be okay.
If I get this wrong, I stop her heart.
What? Mom. Clear.
When is Dad coming back?
Honey, stay quiet.
Mom. What are you talking about?
I have some snacks in my office. Take the kids in there.
Mom. Mom, what is he doing? Where is he going?
He's gone to get something, honey. He's gone to get something.
So yeah, for a brief moment, you think that we're gonna get into that like sci-fi, like, ooh, what happens when you're a clone? But no, it really just gets changed out for kind of generic action schlock, running away from government operatives. It's this whole like cautionary tale of like the mad scientist who plays God too much, but it all worked out fine. He even got to reclone his youngest daughter, you know, at the very end of the film, which is like, if there was any consequence that the film was specifically inventing, it was the consequence of, oh, there's not enough clone pods, you can't clone your youngest daughter. Well, at the end of it, he frickin' clones her. He doesn't clone his assistant, who died at the end of the film and could have been resurrected. They constantly talk about, you know, ooh, beware the consequences of messing with this technology too much. There's no consequences in this film. Why did we go through all that if I wasn't gonna see, you know, his family turn into these like mutant Cronenberg monsters or something?
I love this movie because it was not what I expected. What can people expect?
It's moving, a lot of heart, a lot of passion, I think, you know, family.
What are the consequences of literally playing God with your family, not accepting that death is a real consequence that you have to face?
It doesn't fall into that sort of easy trap that some sci-fi films where it's like, oh, anytime you play with science, it's all bad. It's not all bad. And on the flip side, you do have a price to pay when you start playing with Mother Nature.
Some of the acting was just bizarre. Like, Keanu Reeves at points was really channeling the dad from Back to the Future for some reason.
I'm the baseline, Ed. I'm the control.
I'm your density.
Especially some of the scenes between John Ortiz and Keanu Reeves were like some of the most wooden scenes I've ever seen. And no offense to either actor, like they both have great bodies of work, but for some reason in this movie and in these scenes, wow, it was a sight to behold.
What brings you by?
Let me ask you something. Didn't you ever think this was all a little too easy? Do you know what would happen if word of this ever got out?
Nobody has to know. Nobody will ever know.
Lies are messy. I'm not in the business of messy, it's risky. Who would spend this much money saving mortally wounded soldiers? My God, man. Come on. That's not how you win wars.
We're not a biomedical company.
My name isn't even Jones.
There were also a lot of moments between Thomas Middleditch and Keanu Reeves. Their scenes, man, they were funny. And there were a lot of moments where the music was telling me drama, but the dialogue and the acting were telling me comedy.
You all right?
Pick a name.
Huh, no. No.
There aren't enough parts. Pick a name.
No way, man. You pick it.
Please, goddammit. Please, pick a
Will,
name.
no,
Pick the name.
no.
Pick the name. Pick the name.
No. You pick the damn name. I just talked to Jones, and he said that if we don't get 345 working, he's gonna shut us down.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, there's $8.7 million worth of bionic equipment in your basement, and if he shuts us down, they're gonna come looking for it, and you wanna know the scientific term for that? Royally and utterly boned.
I seriously started to just want it to be a comedy. The number of comedic hijinks that could happen with this. It made me really upset that they tried to make this dramatic when everything about the script was literally screaming comedy. Like, this could have been comedy gold. I guess my final critique of this film, which is where I'm gonna start to talk like even longer, is about the technology. And like with the needle that goes into the eye socket, there's a lot of tech in this film that's either unnecessary and or just completely outright unbelievable, especially like the holograms. We do not have the technology for holograms today or anywhere in the future. Like, this is the best that we can do right now.
What we've created is acoustophoretic volumetric display. So we basically use sound to trap a lightweight object in free space, and we can update its position at very high update rates, so fast that persistence of vision happens and you think it's a full object.
This was meant to be a grounded sci-fi cinema adventure. Well, you can't call it grounded if you're gonna have frickin' holograms in it. That's Star Wars shit. And it's not just like holograms and stuff. It goes into like cloning and transferring consciousness and stuff that's sort of in the public sphere of, well, is this possible or isn't this possible? Something that keeps getting brought up in some of these interviews and whatnot is that this technology is not that far away from us. In fact, some of it is possible today.
You know, there's a lot of science in it, but practical science like cloning to bring your family back.
We're not that far off from this. I mean, in recent years, you've seen like cloning of animals, cloning of people, not that far.
Yeah, this thing can happen tomorrow.
Wow. It sort of begs the question of like, well, what research did they really do for this? Like, did they actually try? Like, are there concepts in this film that could be done in the next 50 years or so? The problem here, though, is that I don't know of any sort of research team that was involved on this film. And in fact, more often than not, Keanu sort of being the star head honcho of the film, kind of anything that he said seems like it just kind of went.
I've been told the science is actually not that far away from reality. I mean, what kind of research did you both do in preparing for it?
Yeah, you go first.
I don't know.
I had to catch up with you because you'd
No,
already done the
no,
research
I did
for a
a
year.
little.
There weren't really any questions being asked of the all-knowing Keanu. The director, who kind of seems like he's just this nodding, smiling yes man, admitted that some of Keanu's lines when he's spitting out all of this like brainiac jargon.
Temporal and axonal online looking good. Frontal online looking good. New theta connectome protocol 345.
A lot of that was apparently improvised.
So it was fun to kind of dive into some of the architecture of the mind, learn a bit about some neurons and some glia.
So, by the way, I'll tell you this. There are a couple of scenes where
uptake.
Keanu's character has to basically improvise.
Some the
and
the charges of the synapses.
That stuff wasn't scripted. That was just Keanu, like from whatever he'd read the night before, talking about different.
Kind of come in,
which was awesome.
Yeah.
In this situation, you're only as good as your best improv. Any concept that you could have researched that would have informed your film is just brushed aside in favor of the best sounding jargon, which may or may not make any actual sense. Now, Keanu went on a little bit about some of his research quests. He described this project he found out about called the Human Connectome Project.
We read about this thing when we were making the movie called the Human Connectome Project, and what they're gradually trying to do is map all of the connections in the brain. But in theory, there is no reason why they can't ultimately track them all, connect them all, and reproduce them all. And when they get to that place, you will have sort of this ability to take a snapshot of the human brain, as the character's doing in the movie.
Which essentially is just a supercharged MRI that's taking these very interesting brain scans and showing basically, where all the connecting lines exist in a human brain. Granted, that provides some very interesting visuals and imagery, none of which really seems to show up in the film. And it's presumptive to think that just because we can image these high amounts of connections in the brain, that information translates to the literal consciousness of the brain. There's a world of difference between just taking a snapshot of something and, well, literally cloning it. And right now, the best thing that we can do is take a snapshot. To say nothing of the fact that the Human Connectome Project is literally showing you physical constructs within the brain that were developed over time. If you wanted to imprint this physical makeup into a clone, the only way I could think of doing that would be through somehow programming this clone to develop those specific ridges and grooves that cause the information to exist, which in itself is ridiculous because the whole idea of cloning as represented in this film is frankly impossible. You can't just clone a fully grown adult. Well, you can't clone humans to begin with at this point.
Cloning basically involves creating a genetically identical copy of a living thing. But that copy doesn't just appear fully grown in a magical box. It has to start out like we all do, as a fertilized egg that develops in the womb before the clone baby is born and grows up at a normal rate.
Embryologist Bill Ritchie had lifted a single mammary cell from a 6-year-old ewe and fused it to a second sheep's unfertilized egg, which had been stripped of its DNA.
That's the method. The actual nuts and bolts of doing it is a little bit more complicated than that.
Removing the original nucleus from the egg, for instance, is easier with cats and mice, harder with dogs and rats, and really, really hard for humans.
People began to say, well, could we do this with humans? And people tended to assume that this would happen.
Pulling the nucleus out also pulls out a bunch of proteins that are important for cell division. Without these, the egg can't develop beyond a single cell.
Any decent college or graduate school student could potentially clone a human being.
I'm not here to put myself on a high pedestal and say that I understand this stuff any better than he does. I'm more pointing out that misconceptions about the way the brain works are possibly more rampant than you might think. I came across a paper or an essay that essentially stated that the way humans think about brains as related to computers is actually very misguided. The way people thought about brains through the years, through the centuries, had a lot to do with whatever the most popular technology was at the time.
The invention of hydraulic engineering in the 3rd century BCE led to the popularity of a hydraulic model of human intelligence. The idea that the flow of different fluids in the body, the humors, accounted for both our physical and mental functioning. The hydraulic metaphor persisted for more than 1600 years, handicapping medical practice all the while. By the 1500s, automata powered by springs and gears had been devised, eventually inspiring leading thinkers such as René Descartes to assert that humans are complex machines. In the 1600s, the British philosopher Thomas Hobbes suggested that thinking arose from small mechanical motions in the brain. In the mid-1800s, inspired by recent advances in communications, the German physicist Hermann von Helmholtz compared the brain to a telegraph. Predictably, just a few years after the dawn of computer technology in the 1940s, the brain was said to operate like a computer, with the role of physical hardware played by the brain itself, and our thoughts serving as software.
Computers are the most advanced form of technology that we know, so it's the most advanced metaphor that we have, but it's still just a metaphor. You can't just copy and paste a brain, and you can't delete information that implies that you are just completely changing the physical makeup of that brain.
The faulty logic of the information processing metaphor is easy enough to state. It is based on a faulty syllogism, one with two reasonable premises and a faulty conclusion. Reasonable premise number 1, all computers are capable of behaving intelligently. Reasonable premise number 2, all computers are information processors. Faulty conclusion, all entities that are capable of behaving intelligently are information processors. Whereas computers do store exact copies of data, copies that can persist unchanged for long periods of time even if the power has been turned off, the brain maintains our intellect only as long as it remains alive. A snapshot of the brain's current state might also be meaningless unless we knew the entire life history of that brain's owner.
This all kind of leaves us with whatever they claimed or wanted to claim that this film was. The film probably could have been very effective if it had gone into the fact that, like, we have these misconceptions that some of these technologies are real and are possible, and the reality is we don't understand the way this stuff works. If the film had gone into anything like that, I would have given them points for it. The whole thing is he played God. Oh my gosh, we raised all these questions and then we just didn't answer them.
If your family dies and you clone them, is it still your family?
As long as there's love and everybody's feeling okay, we're getting along, and we got 3 kids and they're young, they'll, trauma.
You have to go see the movie and then decide for yourself.
Okay.
Clearly, cloning works according to this movie. And the only thing to be cautious of is basically just the government catching wind of your secret project and trying to thwart it. And perhaps they're just oblivious. Perhaps they don't understand that the cautionary tale that they wanted to tell was completely thrown out by the third act. But I'm just more cynical than that. I'm a lot more likely to attribute it to just laziness. They didn't feel like going in deep into the actual science here and what are the actual implications and any of that. They just wanted to capitalize on some popular ideas and have a good time doing it. Either way, they wanted this film to be something more than it turned out to be.
I think it's a film that makes you think and question. There's a lot of science in it, but practical science.
These technologies don't exist. This isn't something we can do. And maybe theoretically someday we could do it, but it's not around the corner. The fear-mongering about it, the cautionary attitude about it just doesn't track with reality at all. But it's more fun to imagine the way things could be if they turned out like this. They are really, really proud of the questions that this film raises, but I've got plenty of questions. The thing I want is an answer that's worth remembering.